Hi, welcome to another video. This is going to be a review for The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. I went in kind of like, I think I'll like it, I don't think I'll love it, but I did end up giving it 5 stars. I was incredibly moved by this story. It was beautiful and it just really surprised me with how it was told. So The Witch's Heart is about Angrboda, who is one of Loki's wives. Angrboda is a witch who is able to use a type of magic that in Nordic mythology is only accessible by women, technically. It's called seer magic, I believe, and she's extremely powerful in using it, and she was sought out by Odin, and Odin burned her 3 times on the pyre, and he ripped her heart out, and somehow she didn't die. And Loki brings her heart back, and that's kind of how he wins her over. But overall, this story, without going into any spoilers about what happens, it is very much about a woman, a powerful witch, who she falls in love with a trickster god, and it puts her life in peril, but she's also a friend and she's a mother, and she is powerful, but at the same time she's worried and she's anxious and she doesn't want the power either. There's kind of this burden that she carries of knowing things that she shouldn't know, but she does, and people seek it out of her, and she's just trying to be helpful. She's genuinely just a kind woman, really. And you kind of discover that she is much more connected to all the beings in Nordic mythology than she even expected. And I really love that part, because so mythology is something I very much enjoy. Nordic mythology I don't know very much about. I know maybe the basics that most people would, but I knew about Angrboda only as Loki's wife, the mother of monsters. That's all I knew her as. And now that I've read this book, it makes me feel almost angry at myself for not realizing how important one singular being in mythology can be and the impact they can have on everything else. Now, I don't really know how many liberties the author took in doing this retelling. I do feel like a lot of the important aspects are touched on. For example, Fenrir biting off Tyr's hand and how he does it, why he does it, that's included. Like these little details of Nordic mythology inserted into the book in a way that makes sense. It was just very well done, because if you don't know, Nordic mythology is very weird. It's very strange. Also, the timeline for it is a little skewed. It's hard to really know where some things happen and where other things don't, and yet this author gave it a timeline and also made these gods very human almost, giving them these mundane lives, these day-to-day things that they do, personalities, fears, and love and hate and human emotion, but still within the context of Nordic mythology, in which a lady gives birth to a snake. You know, it's weird. It's got its things. Before going into the spoilers, I'll give, I guess, a little bit of context, which is this story does take place after Angrboda has been burned multiple times and Odin has stolen her seer magic because he wanted it for himself. Odin is a very greedy man and he wants all of the magic. And so she has escaped and she's just in hiding. And Angrboda isn't even her first name. I forgot what her first name was. So she's hiding out in, I forget what planet, because technically there's like the 9 realms, right? That is something, if you watched Thor, Ragnarok, or not Ragnarok, but the Marvel Thor movies, if you ever watch those, that is kind of accurate with the myth, which is the tree Yggdrasil connects the 9 worlds. And so you have Asgard, where the Aesir live, which is Odin, Balder, Freya, Frigg, those ones. And then you have, I don't know what it's called, but it's where the giants live, and the giants are Loki, Angrboda, Skadi, these other deities, but they weren't really deities. They were giants. It's not exactly the same. Anyways, it's a minor detail. It don't matter. But so Angrboda is hiding there. It is a little slow at the beginning, I'll be honest. Takes a while to pick up, but the writing is so comfy almost. Like it's very cozy. It's a very vibes type of book. I definitely am very happy that I read it in the winter, because I do feel like it fits well for the winter season, even though it's not always a winter setting. We do go through winters. The spoilers are mostly just going to be parts that I thought were really good. The first one is Loki. Loki is a god of mischief, and as much as I feel like there weren't really any villains in this book, even though yes, Odin is a dick, and yes, the giants and the Aesir are fighting and they never get along, and the Aesir kill Scotty's father, and there are many times where it's like, well, they just marry people to try and get them to forge alliances and stuff. There's manipulation and stuff. Loki is a mischievous god, and for some reason he never felt evil. He never felt like the bad guy, even though he did horrible things. But Loki had a moment in the book, I don't remember exactly what page, but he had a moment where he's telling Angrboda, I don't know why I am the way I am. I don't know why I always feel like I need to cause mischief. I don't know why I leave you all the time. I just know that I have to be this way. And it had this sense to me of these gods, these beings of myth who were just said to be that way, were believed to be that way. And to make them as characters like that, it put a perspective where sometimes we do feel like we don't have control over who we are, over our personality, over this is just why we are this way. Like there were the little stories of what Loki did, like the time that he forced Thor to become a giant's bride just to get his hammer back, and the time Loki cut Thor's wife's hair and then he had to make up for it, and then just all these little things. And every time he would come back and see Angrboda and tell her about it, and she would always kind of mock him a little bit, but she also accepted him for who he was, which is beautiful and also kind of horrible because then he does betray her in a horrible way. But before I talk about the way that he betrays her, I do want to also talk about the kids, which were interesting because I really was curious how the author was going to write that, of Angrboda giving birth to Hel, who ends up becoming basically the equivalent of Hades in the underworld in Greek mythology. Hel watches over Niflheim, which is the afterlife of those who could not perish in an honorable way. So it's usually like people who died of sickness or old age or things like that. It's not a horrible place to go, but it's definitely not like a great place to go. So yeah, but Hel is the one who looks over it, and Hel in the myth is known to be kind of half dead, half alive. And I wasn't sure how she was gonna write that in the book, but Hel has legs that essentially are rotting, and the way that it was Angrboda having to give part of her own life to keep Hel alive, and that's why Hel is half dead, half alive. It's only because she needed part of Angrboda's life essence, and then when they're separated and the way that her legs rot more and that she's slowly dying, it was just, that was kind of a beautiful mother-daughter relationship in a way. I know it doesn't sound great, but it was very well depicted. And then her two very monster children, Jormungand and Fenrir. Jormungand is the giant snake and Fenrir is the giant wolf. I wrote it down somewhere. Jormungand really means, because I had no idea. Angrboda named Fenrir and Loki named Jormungand. Jormungand translates to awesomely powerful magical stick, which is hilarious. And I just needed to share that because I find that Loki named things, it was hilarious. Like even the goats that were in the cave living with them, he named them randomly without caring whether they were a boy or girl. So some of the male goats had female names and some of the female goats had male names, and it was just hilarious. And it was really interesting the way that the dynamic between the kids was depicted, where, I mean, how would you act if your brother was a wolf? And like, Fenrir did bite Hel a couple times, and then Jormungand and Fenrir would fight all the time, and Angrboda's just trying to keep her kids in line. I don't know. It was just very interesting, the dynamic that was there, and you could feel how much she loved her kids. But unfortunately, stuff comes around, and then the Aesir come to take Angrboda's children because they are just like, well, they're monsters, and they're dangerous, and they're Loki's children, which is even worse. Oh my goodness. And when they take her kids, that was so heart-wrenching. The way that she felt so powerless and she couldn't do anything. And then she thought she died. She was hit by Thor's hammer in the head. And so you get to this point where you're like, okay, why can't she die? Why is Angrboda immortal, but she's not at the same time? Like, she can die, but she can't? So it just introduces that factor of, okay, who is Angrboda, right? Because so for the large portion of the book, you're just reading about a witch who just doesn't want to get in anyone's business and is doing her own shit, and she met Loki and it seems like everything's okay, but now it's not, and oh my gosh. And then because she also had a vision of Ragnarok. If you don't know, Ragnarok is the end of the world, which I don't believe happens in the actual myth. It's supposed to be like the end of our world, so it's something that's never really happened. But in this book, it is the end of the gods, which I thought was a super interesting take, because the way that it happens is exactly the way that it's told in the myth, where the two wolves that chase the sun and the moon finally catch their prey, and so the world is thrown into darkness, and then there'll be a long winter for 3 years, and Jormungand will arise from the water, his imprisonment in the oceans, and he will gobble up the world, and Fenrir will lay waste to the gods, and all of that happens. But the ending that it brings is, it's almost like this hopefulness or this cyclicalness, right? Of when the gods die, what happens? Well, it's okay because life still goes on, right? I don't know. I thought it had a very interesting ending. But before I completely finish everything, I also want to note Skadi. Skadi is the huntress giant who finds Angrboda in the cave at the very beginning of the book. And man, I'm kind of sad that their relationship didn't have more to it. Like they're basically friends for the very beginning, and then Angrboda meets Loki, and Skadi never meets Loki until like way later, and there are reasons for that. It's because Angrboda doesn't want Skadi to just murder Loki when she sees him, but Skadi is always there for her as a friend, and then they finally, you know, realize that they do love each other, so you do kind of get a lesbian relationship in this, but not really, and that's kind of something that made me a little sad. I wish that they had had a more time together, I guess. I would have liked a little more, especially with how they were. Like, Skadi is like Loki. She would also leave. She would go on hunts and stuff, but she's not a piece of shit like Loki, who ends up fucking everything up and getting his children captured and his poor daughter. It was just, yeah, it was really sad. There were a lot of things in this book that made me very sad. I had moments where I was legitimately crying, but overall, it was such a good reading experience. So yeah, that's where I'll end that. It's a nice and chaotic review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, that is your prerogative, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.